don't you love the high holy days? Christians, we sing and shop for hours. Jews, they spin the dreidel. And Muslims, well, they partake in a bombathon. So it's Ramadan, and once again, the Islamic State has urged their adherents to wage war on infidels. In the first 10 days of Ramadan, Islamic terrorists have killed shy of 600 innocents in 55 attacks across 17 countries. Worth mentioning here, by the way, that the amount of attacks or murders waged by all other religions and Islamophobes combined has been a total of 0. So far this year, Ramadan attacks have hit countries all the way from Afghanistan to Australia, as well as attacks against infidels in the European Caliphate, including an attack in Germany against a father of 2 who was stabbed to death by Muslims for smoking during Ramadan. And of course, the London Bridge attack, which left 7 dead and 48 injured, several of whom remain in critical condition. A terror attack, by the way, that came on the heels of the pre-Ramadan attacks on Westminster, 6 dead there, and Manchester, in which 22 innocents were killed, including children as young as 8 years old. But don't worry, Brits, Prime Minister Theresa May, she's got you covered. Shortly after the most recent attack, Miss May pledged to regulate the internet, because apparently that will stop terrorism, because clearly what the UK has is an internet freedom problem, not an Islamic terrorism problem. So after all of this, a friend of mine from the UK asked me something that maybe a couple of you might be thinking if you're in regular conversation with those sobs who have not yet been green-pilled, i.e. have their eyes opened, their mind opened to the not-so-secret truth that the Muslim holy war is the greatest threat to our Western civilization. So my friend, he asked me if I ever feel like I've said everything that I can say at this point about the European Caliphate. How many times can you make the same videos? He asked before suggesting that I retire. Truth be told, I have not said everything that I can say on the issue. I've actually been sitting on a couple ideas, ones that are perhaps a touch more severe than my usual suggestions to date. So here's how I see it. So we've tried things. The diversity is our strength, open borders, cultural enrichment way, right? Well, in order to reverse things, Europe's going to have to change its approach radically. What Europe needs in order to solve its jihad problem is a two-pronged plan. One that is preventative and the other that's adaptive for the Muslim populations already within their borders. Now, first, how to prevent their jihadi cancer from metastasizing. A Trump-styled travel ban in the skies and stopping the boats at sea. Save Sweden, every European nation that's been hardest hit by Islamism is a NATO member state. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, that Three Musketeers clause of an attack against one is an attack against all, it must be invoked. Article 5 was invoked after 9/11, and the world went to Afghanistan thereafter. And yes, I understand that there is a NATO US-led mission in the Middle East right now, but guess what? The terrorists aren't just hiding in the Middle East this time. Their military invasion is occurring along the Mediterranean shorelines of Greece and Italy. Consequently, Europe must turn these terror cargo boats away. And the only way to do that is with trained troops, armed to the teeth, RPGs, you name it, unafraid of, yes, firing at the migrant boats in order to ensure that the message that Europe is closed for business gets back to the countries from which they hail. So far this year, already 70,000 migrants have entered Europe by sea, and that is a very conservative estimate, by the way. 80% of those migrants arrived through Italy alone. This is, of course, at the outset of the summer, when numbers typically rise, and that's on top of the literal millions who have already arrived. This is an invasion, time to just wake up and stop the enemy rather than corralling them in. And stopping the boats isn't a pipe dream. After migrant bodies washed up on Australian shores, the country implemented one of the harshest border policies in the whole world, and it was characterized by 3 core points. Number 1, turning away or towing back migrant boats. Number 2, forcing migrants to live in detention centers. And number 3, guaranteeing that they will never be resettled in Australia. It worked in Australia, and it can work in the Mediterranean. So, what are we to do with the migrants who are already in Europe? Ask me, there are actually 2 groups of migrants, the fundamentalists and those for which there could be some hope for integration, contingent on several dependent variables. First, the fundamentalists. Any migrant or citizen on any terror watch list ought to be detained. I'm not sure how many more generals, commanders, and pollsters politicians have to hear from before they finally clue into the fact that ISIS has infested the migrant class, which is in turn infesting boroughs all across Europe. But right now, in the UK, for instance, the scale of terror is some 23,000 suspects being monitored. And you know what I say? Lock them up. Imagine the scale of security and intelligence resources and monies that are being poured into just monitoring these jihadis. And it's not even working. Of all the recent attacks in Europe, these terrorists have already been known to police. Men, women, all considered different levels of risk. For Pete's sakes, the London Bridge attack was committed by a terrorist who, while known to the authorities, it wasn't even under surveillance because they were considered to be, quote, low risk. Europe is absolutely kidding herself if she thinks that she's striking some sort of a balance between civil liberties and security. The security of the European people is at risk every damn minute of every damn day because they've put migrant liberties above European children's safety. Enough. In turn, every damn suspected jihadi, even those considered low risk, indefinitely. Okay, so what do we do about the migrants that are already within European borders and will not be put in jail? We make them Europeans by rooting out all the things that lead to Muslim radicalization. And we do that by stopping the Sharia courts, madrasas, and shutting down the radical mosques. As it stands, Sharia is an official part of Germany's private law. I know. Meantime, in the UK, there are over 85 Sharia courts. Shut them down. European nations already have laws, and those laws ought to be respected as the chief authority of the land. Otherwise, if Muslims can bypass European courts altogether and adjudicate for themselves, then, well, European laws are bankrupt and can be done away with. As for the thousands of Islamic supplementary schools across Europe, the madrasas, which are home to literally hundreds of thousands of young Muslims, they absolutely must be heavily regulated or done away with altogether. Government-sponsored classes in which young Muslims are taught European history, European politics, and European values such as the equality of women must be enforced. All teachers ought to be properly vetted with police checks, and all curriculum ought to be passed through, yes, an objective, and yes, a ruthless eye at the respective departments of education to ensure fundamentalist teaching, hate, and conspiracy theory is not included. And I know that a lot of this sounds like basic common sense, but the madrasas in the UK, for instance, have only just started to become regulated by the state. Islam is a religion of submission through force. Force is a language that these migrants understand. And the state is the only body in a position to legitimately and surgically execute such plans. Because God knows, if the politicians and the military don't take matters into their hands, the people will. For the Rebel.media, I'm Faith Goldy. If you enjoyed this video, click like below and subscribe to our YouTube channel.